Welcome to the BEAD informational webinar. I'm going to pause for a second and we're going to start the recording. Okay, so just making sure everybody knows this, we're in record now. I want to welcome everybody today to this webinar. Our intent today is to really share a lot of information, to verbalize a lot of content that's been put in some very complicated documents, but we want to get everybody up to speed. I'm going to start real quickly. I want to introduce everybody that's in the room. Of course, my name is Jim Stritzinger. I'm the director of the South Carolina Broadband Office. Mike?
Yeah, good morning. Mike Hertzberger, the deputy director here of the South Carolina Broadband Office.
Cedric Kitt, senior director of broadband infrastructure.
Hank Page, Public Information Officer.
Amy Marshall, Finance Manager.
James Tannis, Senior Data Scientist.
So thanks everybody, and then we're going to go ahead and share some slides, and we will be turning off the video on our end, but and we'll dive in a sec.
Let me go ahead and stop sharing and then turn off the video. There we go.
All right. So we're going to walk through. BEAD is a very extensive program with a lot of rules, regulations, and especially as we dial into South Carolina related stuff, we wanted to share a lot of stuff. Folks in this room have put a ton of time into this, and we're gonna talk through it. This is I want to tell everybody, we don't want anybody offended, but this is a one-way flow of information today. Our purpose is to capture public comments, and we can't do that if we're doing a lot of dialogue back and forth. So this is a one-way share of information. We're not capturing any kind of chats or comments, and we really want you to lean in and actually put them in writing through our public comment phase. So we're going to step you through some background. I think you all know we've been doing a ton of work on the BEAD program really since this time last year through the 5-year action plan. We'll talk about that. The principal focus for today is on this document called the initial proposal, which is due from South Carolina on December 27th, NTIA. We have a lot of detail and a lot of sections, and then we are going to share some next steps that we want you all to roll up your sleeves and engage with us on. All right, big disclaimer. Everything that we're sharing today is subject to change and likely will change. We are required to do a public comment period. We opened that up on October 30th. It closes on November 30th. But this is really our interpretation of a lot of federal guidelines and templates, and we've done the best we could to shape stuff for NTIA, but they're going to have to approve everything along the way. So Mike's going to very quickly just pop this link and show you where you can go. We all want you to read this document carefully. So there you go. When you click the link, there are two drop-down sections, one for volume 1 and the other for volume 2, with the document and our responses to NTIA, along with any associated attachments in their current form. So we hope that you all will dig into this document, and the purpose, again, for this video, we are recording it all, is to kind of step you through the sections, give you some background and some information, and then help you along the way. All right, so let's dive in. First of all, about BEAD, a little bit of backstory. November of 2021, President Biden signed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, also known as IIJA. There are multiple components of IIJA as they reflect on broadband. There's the BEAD program, the Digital Equity Program, there's a tribal component, and also the middle mile component. For today's purposes, we are focused in on BEAD. BEAD is really the infrastructure, the residential, the business, community anchor deployment focus. Digital equity will be a topic for another day, but I want to make sure everybody is focused in on that. So again, some of you have seen this graphic that we've used for training for our broadband champions. Access, adoption, and use are the three words we use in broadband. For today, we are focused on the access side of the equation. There'll be other content later on. There's a lot of features of the BEAD program. It's very much focused on broadband deployment. I want to make sure everybody understands this is very different than American Rescue Plan focus. The BEAD program is focused on getting 100.0%, connecting everybody to a high-speed connection in their house. President Biden proclaimed on June 26th that the goal is to connect every single home and business in the United States to high-speed internet service by 2030. So that's the overarching goal that every state is now responding to. The BEAD program is really cool that it has deployment features. It also has some non-deployment features. We're going to step you through that. And every state is required to produce an initial proposal. It's broken up. You'll hear us using the terms Volume 1 and Volume 2, and that'll make a little more sense, but let's dive in. All right, specific to South Carolina, there are 3 IIJA planning components that we've been engaged in. You all, I think, are aware that we had to produce the 5-year action plan. That started December last year. It concluded, we actually submitted it to NTIA on August 25th. And that is out there. That link is there for you to read and review it. The 5-year action plan was really our assessment of the state. The initial proposal is very different than the action plan. The initial proposal, which we'll talk about today, is intended to be the blueprint of how South Carolina will approach and our exact methodology for reaching every single home in the state of South Carolina. So James and Mike and I we're gonna step through this and give you a lot of insight. The initial proposal, both Volume 1 and 2, are due to the federal government by December 27th. Touching very briefly, this is not our team's responsibility, but the digital equity plan is also due to NTIA by February 15th next year. So that's the only comment we're going to make on that right now. You'll hear more about that later. All right, setting expectations on timeline. We are reading tea leaves here. I want to be very clear. The only thing we can do is use information that's been shared with us from NTIA, and I'm going to step you through this a little bit. The first piece, if you go from left to right, the 5-year action plan was actually submitted on August 25th. We checked that checkbox. That is done. The digital equity plan is in production right now, and that's another team working on that. But we've already made mention, the initial proposal is due to NTIA by December 27th. I will tell you that none of us plan on working on Christmas, so we'll have it done ahead of that date. But that is our hard stop with NTIA. And not just South Carolina. All 50 states and U.S. territories are required to deliver their initial proposals to NTIA on December 27th. Stepping past making the assumption that we get it in on time, there's an approval process. Again, we're reading tea leaves here, but NTIA has telegraphed to all states that they're hopeful to have all of the approvals done for the initial proposals by March 31st of next year. So March 31, 2024 is what is kind of our working assumption. Very much subject to change, but if we assume that that is accurate, the second quarter of 2024 will be our BEAD challenge. I'm not going to give you exact dates. Those will unfold as the approvals happen. Once the challenge is done, we'll go through deduplication. That's where we subtract out things that may have been funded with other federal sources out of our maps. Then towards the end of next year, we will be doing what's called subrecipient selection. And we have to come up with a full list. And believe it or not, we have 365 days from initial approval to come up with what's called the final proposal. And The final proposal, as best we can assess right now, will be due to NTIA by March 31st, 2025. So saying this a little bit differently, we're going to have to commit $551 million worth of resources in 365 days. It's a big lift. And then, Mike, we've been talking, our whole team has been huddling. There is an approval process after the final proposal goes in, just setting expectations of all of the ISPs. Based on what we're seeing right now, the earliest possible day that you will have a notice to proceed for BEAD funds will be July 1, 2025. That's our working assumption right now. So that's a starting point on dates. Next. All right. Within our 5-year plan, you've heard us a lot. You know, Nanette's been talking about this. I've been talking about this for years. We had a goal of deploying our American Rescue Plan money and getting all those funds deployed, getting everybody connected by the end of 2026. Well, guess what? That's when we had the goal of 25-3, connecting all of the unserved homes. BEAD has forced us to really change the goalpost and to fold in what are called the unserved homes. So I know many of you made mention or have observed that when we remapped the state back in March, that we reevaluated the whole state based on a new goalpost. So all the maps that you currently see on SC Digital Drive are based on 100/20 goalposts versus 25/3. So this you can read in more detail in the 5-year plan, this cascade of dates, but we think we're going to reach most of the unserved homes. We'll have a lot of those done by the end of 2026 with construction completes. And our goal is now 2028 to reach all of the underserved homes, and that'll be the end of the BEAD program. Ready? James, take away.
All right, thank you, Jim. So I'm going to go and cover volume 1. There are 3 main components of volume 1, which cover the community anchor institutions, how we defined it, and the eligibility for CAIs. Broadband serviceable locations, which includes homes and businesses, and how we define them as unserved, underserved, and their eligibility. And then the challenge process, which covers eligible challengers and the eligible challenges that can be made. All right, so first, the community anchor institution. So the SCBBO defined it as we just took the statutory definition in the BEAD Volume 1 guidance and used it. The main highlight of this definition that everybody needs to focus on is in green. The location needs to facilitate the greater use of broadband service by vulnerable populations. So if you believe your location meets this definition and facilitates the greater use of broadband service by vulnerable populations, please scan the QR code, send us an email, and fill out the form to get the CAI added to our list. So we also took the CAIs and we broke them down into different categories. So we have schools, library, government buildings, healthcare facilities, public safety, higher education, and community support educations. So if you fall into one of those groups and you meet the definition above, please use the QR code and fill out the survey to get the CAI added to the list. Okay, so community anchor institution eligibility. For your CAI to possibly be eligible for BEAD funding, you need to meet these 4 criteria here. You need to first meet the definition of a CAI defined by the SCBBO in Volume 1. You need to be on the list. So you can either do that but 2 ways. You can complete the survey, or you can challenge a missing CAI during the challenge process. Definitely not the recommended way of doing it. Be best to get on the list right now by completing the survey. So number 3, this is a big one. Lack access to 1 gigabit symmetric service. So this isn't the service that you currently have at your CAI. This is what you could subscribe to. So if you have gigabit symmetric service available, but you do not subscribe to it, you are ineligible. You have to lack the ability for your CAI to be able to subscribe to gigabit symmetric service. I just want to make sure that's clear with everybody. We've had some confusion on that one. So it is lacking access, not what you subscribe to. And then the final step is we have to approve the CAI. So it has to go through all three, and then we have to make the final determination if it meets all the criteria. All right, so the next step is the eligible BSLs. So first, in volume 1, we had to define the BSLs. So again, the BSLs are going to be homes or businesses from the FCC BDC fabric. So we are going to be using version 3 of the fabric. So we defined unserved BSLs as any BSL that lacks access to 25/3 service. So the next one, underserved. So we took some of the optional items and we created our own underserved definition. So an underserved BSL, how we are defining it right now in volume 1 is any BSL that lacks access to 100/20 service, or is a DSL only BSL, or has cellular-based fixed wireless service only. So those unserved and underserved that meet those definitions, those are the points that could potentially be eligible. Well, the next step we have to take is we take the eligible unserved or underserved BSLs and we have to run a deduplication on them. So we remove out any state funding commitments, which could be ARPA, SLFRF commitments, CPF commitments, county ARPA commitments, and we have to pull them out and mark them as funded and kind of served. And then the next is any federal funding commitments, which could include RDOF, Reconnect, Enhanced ACAM, and so forth. So what we end up with is a final list of unserved and underserved BSLs that have no type of funding commitment to them. Okay, so then the final step of volume 1 is the challenge process. So this is going to be a challenge portal we kind of developed here in the office that we will run sometime in Q2 of 2024. So 3 big pieces of this. So there's eligible challengers. So there's only 3 types of entities that could actually challenge the BSLs. It is nonprofit organizations, units of local or tribal government, or ISPs. So what we are going to do is we are going to set up a registration link sometime in the coming months where you have to sign up to be an eligible challenger and prove to us that you fall in one of those 3 categories. The next step is if you are one of the eligible challengers, we have what can be challenged. So you can challenge the identification of a CAI. So if you believe you have a location that was not on our list, you can challenge it to be added. You could challenge a CAI to be removed. So you can, the next type of challenge could be the gigabit symmetric service for a CAI. So if you believe you sent us a CAI and it didn't make it to the map, that is because we determined it had gigabit symmetric service. You can fill out a challenge to say, actually, we do not have access to gigabit symmetric service. We need to be added back to the eligible CAIs. Or somebody could fill out and say, this CAI should not be eligible because it does have access to gigabit symmetric service. So then the third type of challenge is the residential BSL challenges. So listed below, these are the only types of challenges we can accept at the BSL level. So availability, speed, latency, data cap, technology, business only service, funding commitment, and a planned service. So then finally, we have the challenge period timeline and process. So the challenge period is really a 3-step process that we're going to run over 90 days. So what happens is one of the 3 types of eligible challengers submits a challenge. The SCBBO either accepts or denies the challenge. If the challenge is accepted, only an ISP can review the challenge. So they have a 30-day window to review any challenge that the SCBBO has accepted. And then at the end, if a ISP has reviewed it or they haven't, the SCBBO makes a final determination on any type of challenge or review that has been submitted to our office. One thing we do want to mention is we are only going to be doing single location-based challenges and you have to provide documentation for any of the three challenges that I explained for anything that you submit for a challenge or review. So you have to upload a PDF showing how you have a valid challenge to us. So it is a lot of work, but we believe we'll have a good map and we should not receive many challenges. Mike?
All right, thanks, James. I appreciate it. So we're going to pivot now and talk about volume 2. Just like volume 1, it follows a template that NTIA has put out there for all states to work from. And really the key here is to address all of the requirements that are outlined in the NOFO. So you'll notice here some of the highlights, and do want to disqualify the slides you're going to see are not exhaustive, right? There are other requirements that are part of volume 2 that are outlaid that we just decided not to put in here because we had to trunk it at some point, right? This is really just a highlight. And again, strongly encourage everyone to go back, actually pull down a copy of volume 2, look at the attachments and give us some comments and some feedback. But what you're going to find overall really is the outlay of our design of this grant program that we're going to administer for deploying broadband, right? We'll speak to coordination protocols in this initial proposal, implementation activities, non-deployment activities. Jim's going to pick that up here in a little bit. I'm going to focus more on deployment activities, right? So those elements that are most specific to how you're ultimately going to, if you're an ISP, apply to go and obtain this funding to solve broadband here in the state. So let's go ahead and jump in. First things first here, deployment activities. Who's really eligible? Well, these are the, as best we can tell, 5 absolute requirements for any prospective applicant to apply for BEAD deployment funds. Number 1, and some of this hopefully shouldn't be too much of a deviation from what folks are used to in terms of applying from, either ARPA SLFRF or ARPA CPF, but ACP participation, that is a must, right? You have to be registered through sam.gov. You have to accept the state's low-cost broadband plan. We've outlined that at 100 by 20 for $50. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. Again, hopefully this isn't too big of a shock for folks. We have required a low-cost broadband plan under prior grants we've administered. The difference here is that we're setting the price. So we're going to talk about how we arrived at that number here in a little bit. You have to conform to additional engineering design criteria in flood-prone areas. This was a requirement of NTIA to address climate and weather-related risks. So that is another big component that is going to be new. We tend to give the latitude to our ISPs to define how they should best configure their network. This is now a situation where we need to interject in order to maintain compliance with what the NTIA is expecting. The other thing is you have to meet all this gating criteria, right? Gating criteria and selection criteria are different things. Let's just be clear about what this is. Gating criteria are your absolute have-to-haves, right? These are the things that, regardless of where you're applying, you have to meet these minimum qualifications, right? We're going to talk about that. And that all has to be submitted at the point of entry when you come through the front door and you submit your grant application. It's going to be a heavy lift. So just prepare yourself now on that side. The other side of that spectrum are selection criteria. And selection criteria, as it would implicitly imply, is the scoring that we would go through to actually score any particular project. We're going to talk about that here in some of these following slides. Project areas. So one of the things that NTIA has required is for each state to define a project area. What could that be? Different states have done it different ways. Our decision here was to focus on a county solution, right? That is to say, we want our grant applicants to solve the county. We encourage partnerships, right? So if you are a large ISP, maybe you want to go it alone and you want to submit a grant and you want to solve the entire county all by yourself. We'll accept that. We will also accept, though, where we could get a combination of ISPs to come together, work together, right? That's the big paradigm here, and ultimately solve the county, right? Figure out the best way to carve up where all of the unserved and underserved are and solve the entire county. And then when that comes to us, we will score it based on all of the applications. But a couple of details specific to partnering, you have to decide who the partners are and divide up those BSLs in a county before you actually submit the grant, right? It has to be a known partnership. Each ISP would still submit an individual application, but they would reference that this is a partnership working with whichever other ISPs they plan to work with to solve that county. And again, partnerships, they're going to be scored in aggregate. So we're really hoping this levels the playing field. So regardless if you're a small local provider or if you're a stadium name provider, we want to be able to leverage everyone. And this allows us to ultimately do that and level that playing field. So we're excited about this approach. And I think there's probably going to be some more discussion with different association groups that might get into the weeds on this.
Just adding to this,
Yeah.
This is a unique opportunity for South Carolina, and I want to make the point that strategically, we have to think about where South Carolina is going to be at the end of our American Rescue Plan. So BEAD will pick up where American Rescue Plan leaves off. And we're in a very unique, positive position in the United States where a lot of our counties have had significant activity. So that's why we landed on this county construct. We think it's the best strategic way to approach finishing off South Carolina. So just wanted to make that point.
You will notice a provision in the Volume 2 initial proposal referencing specifically extremely high cost thresholds. We have actually submitted a waiver to the NTIA specific to certain conditions that would merit a waive of the 25% non-federal match on a particular project, right? So what we're really focused in on here is a market-based approach. And that's just a fancy way of saying we believe our ISPs know best in terms of what amount of time, energy, and money it's going to take to deploy their facilities, right? So we expect that ISPs are going to flag those ones that for whatever reason are marked as extremely high cost. And we're going to need justification. Ultimately, what we'll do is we're going to try to negotiate them back in, right? That's step one, right? We really want, and we hope that because we've chosen counties, right, as our project area, that, the sheer volume of BSLs that are going to be in a particular project would offset, or if you will, round out, smooth out some of those extremely high cost homes. Again, it's about internet for all, and that's the drive from NTIA. So we took it seriously. And again, these controls here are really set up to, number one, try to get all of those, even extremely high cost areas served at point of entry when the application comes in. If we can't reach a deal, what we're ultimately going to do then is we're going to take that master list and we're going to look for other ISPs that are in that area that can provide hopefully a priority broadband project that is fiber to the premise, right? We will negotiate that out as best we can in good faith. If we can't find anyone to take that on, we just no takers, right? Can't get cable or fiber, we'll start to then look at other less, highly functional technologies, especially if they're already unserved, they have nothing. This is when we start to then look at alternate technologies and consider the possibility of giving them something if we can't give them the priority broadband project that everyone is, NTIA is focusing us on, which is, again, fiber to the prem. So we go through all of that. If we still can't find anyone that will jump on this bandwagon and serve these extremely high cost homes wherever they are, then what we're proposing to NTIA is to drop that non-federal match, right? And we pay 100%. So this is all pending. We haven't yet heard back from NTIA either way as to whether or not they're going to accept this. So this is all to be continued. But currently, this is the way we're looking at this. This is our approach. And again, it's really driven by the market and what our ISPs are telling us. But just keep in mind, we're going to push back and we're going to expect that, you know what, if you're taking the whole county, you got to take the hard to reach ones too, right? Gating criteria. So again, as mentioned previously, these are our have to haves. These are the bare minimum things you must do as part of your grant submission on the front end. And we've asked 3 different times to NTIA, hoping for a different answer. One has not been provided. We have to gate, then we score, and that's if there's a competing application, right? Then we take that package, we give it to them, and they have to approve it, right? The order of operation was very clear, though. All of this has to happen up front at point of entry. It couldn't happen after the fact. So you need to keep that in mind. And again, this really represents, in my opinion, the bulk of volume 2, are all of the different elements that are specific to gating that serve as have to haves and how specifically the broadband office here in South Carolina is going to address each and every one of them. So to shave this down and not make it a 3-hour presentation, We're going high level, and I do have a couple of slides. We're going to touch on a couple of these elements, but in the interest of time, I'm going to continue to move forward. Again, we gauge, then we score, right? So once we gauge your project, then we're going to go back, and this is our scoring rubric right here. So think of our guidelines that we have submitted out under ARPA, SLFRF, and CPF. This right now, as proposed, is how we are ultimately going to score BEAD grant deployment here in South Carolina, specific to, look, let me just be clear. Two things here, right? You've got priority broadband projects, you've got non-priority broadband projects. The goal here is priority broadband projects, which is fiber to the premise, right? If we get a submission of an application and it's fiber to prem, and let's say there's another project that they're saying hybrid fiber coax, fiber to prem is going to win, right? Because that is the number one. If no one else applied and all we have is an HFC project, well, then that actually becomes that's number two scoring rubric that we would then step through, right? It's important to note that the bulk of these criteria are requirements specific from NTIA. In fact, we've only actually added one thing beyond, if you will, the manufacturer settings here in terms of what the NTIA expects all states to adhere to, and that's local coordination, right? So we are in the process of writing out examples, right, of how we'll ultimately score this. This is all baked into volume 2, so do feel free to peruse that. But local coordination, again, back to that county theme, we've done something unique here. We are requiring basically a letter from either the county council or the county administrator for whatever county that you're applying to. And we will only accept one letter, right? And that letter is worth 10 points. So you can get other letters of support, that's great. We obviously want to know and see that everyone's partnering. Building awareness, that's certainly going to help when we start to talk about adoption and use. And the real key here, though, is we are only going to accept one letter. So hypothetical, I have one ISP that wants to go and do it solo, right? I have a group of ISPs over here that wants to do the same count, and they want to do it together, right? The group and that single ISP goes to that county administrator. Let's say the county administrator hands both the group and the one that wants to do it solo a letter, like, okay, we're going to support you both, 0 points. That's worth repeating, right? So we are only going to accept one letter. And if we get more than one letter, then ultimately it's going to be zeroed out. We're not going to give out points. You actually have to pick, if you are a county representative, which one of these particular ISPs that you want to work with in your county. Now, if you happen to go with the group approach, right? So it's a group of ISPs that are going to work together, that letter can reference the entire group, and that is absolutely acceptable. The 10 points rolls, right? It'll work. But this is a big so what, and it's going to demonstrate how well our applicants ultimately coordinate with their local partners. And we believe the better coordination we get at the local level, the greater likelihood we're going to get the outcome we're looking for in the end, right? Which is true adoption and use, right? We don't want to build bridges to nowhere. So we're excited about this, but we do think it's going to require some different thinking in terms of how you go about approaching where you're doing your work in a given jurisdiction. So more to come on that here in the future. Going to talk a little bit about low cost plan. We have requirements as part of the NTIA to actually establish a low cost plan. And I mentioned this previously, this was one of our bare minimums. You have to accept the state's low cost plan. And we went with $50 a month, 100 by 20 service. And the truth is, this is right in the middle of what we have been getting historically from ARPA SLFRF and ARPA CPF. Again, historically, ISPs got to set their low cost plan, present that to us, and we accepted it, or hey, can you work on this? And that's the plan, right? And that's still in play for those areas that we funded, right? And ensuring that that plan is viable and useful to those that are in those project areas. This is different, right? This is basically, we took the average of all of the plans, low cost plans we got, and it came down to 50 a month, 100 by 20 service. Something that I do want to just point out here is the way the BEAD Notice of Funding Opportunity reads is that this low cost plan, this is NTIA now, this is not SCBBO. That low cost plan has to be available to consumers for the useful life of the network asset, right? So The next question out of our mouths to NTIA was, well, what is the useful life of the network asset? What, define it for us. We've not yet received feedback on that. And because of that, we didn't feel it was appropriate to go and try to lock in an ISP to an undetermined amount of time for a particular fixed price of broadband service. So what we have proposed to NTIA is to actually go in 5 years and reevaluate where that low-cost pricing plan is and consider adjusting accordingly at that time in the event that it makes sense to do so. This is really just kind of a moment to pause, right, and evaluate where we are. What is the industry trend? Does a change make sense? Because we didn't feel, again, it was appropriate to try to lock in on a plan for an undetermined amount of time. The NOFO is not explicit about was that, are we defining it as 10, 20, 30 years? I think if you ask 10 people, you're gonna get 10 different responses. So TBD on that, but again, that's why we added in this, if you will, off-ramp for that 5-year duration upon project completion to reevaluate that low-cost plan. Some more details on the plan. That first bullet is probably the most important. Again, 50 a month or less. That is inclusive of all taxes and fees and charges billed to the customer. So you have to be able to take that 50 also and then apply the ACP benefit. So folks that qualify for ACP are looking at a plan that's about $20 a month, and that's a great deal. I'm sure we'd love it to be free, but we felt that given where we are currently in the state, given the trends of our ISPs, the competitiveness that they already bring to the table, $20 a month for 100 by 20 service is a pretty righteous deal. The plan has to consistently and reliably have or maintain download speeds of at least 100 by 20, maintenance measurements no more than 100 milliseconds, no data cap, surcharges, or usage based throttling. And subscribers need to be able to also be able to, if you have a better plan, they need to be able to subscribe to that better plan as well. You can't lock them in. So lots of text here. I'm not going to go verbatim, but the key thing here is, again, we feel that this was, again, middle of the road. We took the average of every low-cost plan we've had, and 50 a month was actually, again, seemed reasonable. So if for some reason you feel this is not reasonable, you can certainly submit a comment, and again, we'll talk about that here in one of our wrap-up slides. MBE, WBE participation. So this is new, right? To date, there has never been a requirement to have MBE or WBE participation under our ARPA, CPF, or SLFRF grant programs. This is a requirement for NTIA and BEAD. And we don't specifically set a goal here, but we do make it a requirement that everyone make a good faith effort to ultimately seek out opportunities to plug in MBEs and WBEs into their overall project delivery team. This is a big deal, right? If you're an MBE or you're WBE, you're registered with the state. You can plug an MBE or WBE in all kinds of different ways, whether it be from engineering, it could be for stakeout, it could be doing 811, gig locates. I mean, any number of ways you could ultimately plug in an MBE to help support local businesses here in the state, and that's a big deal. If you propose not to give us any MBEs as far as participation in your grant application, you have to provide justification as to why. We need to see a demonstrated good faith effort that you went and looked at for whatever reason you couldn't find it. So addressing the how. So if you've had a chance to actually download and look at volume 2 so far, what you'll find is each and every one of those elements under that gating criteria, every single section really speaks to the how. And for folks that have submitted grants through the SCBBO in the last couple of years, it's really going to run a similar track, right? The guidelines are going to ultimately outline all of the have-to-haves and all of the nice-to-haves. Your grant applications are going to have big chunks for narratives. It's going to include sections that are confirmations that are really the precursor of the actual requirement if you get an award that would play out in the grant agreement. And there are a lot of attachments that need to come point of entry at the point of submission. Some of these things I think should be pretty straightforward. You guys probably already do it. Other things, maybe not so much. So this, by the way, I don't think is an exhaustive list. So there is a lot here that needs to be unpacked, and you need to be starting to think about this now. If you're an ISP and you want to go for the BEAD funds, we certainly hope that you do. But this is just, again, a glimpse of what you can expect if you're going to apply for deployment funds under BEAD. And, we're here to help. We're going to do our best to try to carve out templates that, helps to streamline some of this as far as the way you'll capture this information and get it to us. And, really, it's not about a gotcha. It's about making sure that the investment is sound and wise. And of course, everything that we do, once we pick whoever we pick, we score, we bundle up those packages as our final proposal. We have to submit that back to NTIA, and ultimately they have to approve it. So need to focus on long game here, but again, we're here to work with you. Our goal is to solve the state, and we think we can do that if each of our ISPs focus on solving each county. So with that, I'm going to pivot to my colleague, Mr. Stritzinger, and we're going to talk about implementation activities.
So thanks, Mike, and awesome job on that. BEAD is a very different animal than anything you've worked with us before. The American Rescue Plan, both the state and local fiscal recovery funds and capital project fund, were focused on recovering the country from COVID. They had an emergency-based response. They're moving much more quickly. What you just saw and heard from Mike, the requirements of BEAD are very, very different. There's workforce, there's climate resiliency, there's cybersecurity requirements, things that some of you may not have documented before, and we want to give you enough time to get ready for it. But there's a lot of interesting features of BEAD that we're excited about, specific to South Carolina. And these things have never been available to us before. So when you look, it's helpful to understand the national context. Some states are really struggling to have the available workforce to actually construct their broadband. So BEAD gives us the ability as a state to make investments in workforce for the first time ever. But it's very specific. It's broadband related workforce. And we're looking at that excitedly. There's some really cool things we can do, and we want to kind of share that today. So when the initial proposal is approved, and our working assumption for initial proposal approval will be March 31, 2024. And at that time, technically, 20% of the BEAD funds will be available to South Carolina. There's a big caveat to that. It's heavily restricted BEAD funds. We're not going to be able to use any of that money for infrastructure build out. That's because you have to do the challenge process and other things. But that initial 20% money might be usable for us to do things like apprenticeships. We're looking very seriously at working with some of our other state agencies to fold in some apprentices into our broadband workforce. This might afford any of our ISPs to bring on a new GIS staff member or a new compliance team member. We're excited about that, and we'll be talking to, some of you are aware we have apprenticeship SC in South Carolina, and we have the ability, and we will be working through MOUs with other state agencies. So we think we can get that rolling next year. We're going to put that into our proposal, and again, it's subject to approval from NTIA. Once the initial proposal is approved, the final proposal is going to take another year, right? We already talked about 365 days. But as we stare at the needs of South Carolina, we would love for you all to read this section in detail and give us public comments. But we know that broadband permitting is an issue. So guess what? We want to focus some dollars and have at our adjacent state agencies, for example, DOT and DHEC and the other agencies, they could probably use a lift for some staff members. So we want to have dedicated broadband permitting swim lanes, I'll call it that. There's some opportunity for middle mile infrastructure, investments in precision agriculture, home-based telehealth, home-based K-12 residential achievement. We want to lift up some homes. But again, these are complicated programs. There's a lot of details, but they do require 100% BEAD focus to be eligible for funding. Thanks, Mike. Non-deployment activities. Because of where we are, and this is a big unknown for us, how many BSLs are going to remain after we've deployed all of our American Rescue Plan dollars. You all know, I think, we're in the middle of doing that now. We still have approximately, Amy, correct me if I'm wrong, about 225 million of our American Rescue Plan dollars to commit.
Excluding this, yeah.
Yeah, so we're working our way through that. So when our American Rescue Plan commitments finalize, we will know how many BSLs are left. We'll make an estimate on the number of BEAD dollars that we need to allocate that direction. And then we can do some really cool things. We have extensive write-ups, well, not extensive, but pretty good write-ups in volume 2. The thing I'm personally very excited about is this thing we're calling a rural resource network. And as we stare, as the broadband office stares at the state, one of the things we know is missing is solid cell phone service. And a lot of our cell phone services are limited based on the fact that we don't have backhaul existing in certain key places in South Carolina. That's the concept of the rural resource network. Think of it as a multi-county, high-speed fiber ring. We would love to build a couple of these in our places that really need help. The community anchor institutions can connect to them. These are AI-capable, supremely high-speed networks that we think we can engineer in South Carolina, assuming, of course, that we have enough money to pull that off. That's the big unknown. It's a moving target right now. We'll be working through this. I do want to say that we've been working with all the leadership at the General Assembly, the governor's office, our congressional team members to talk about the art of the possible for South Carolina. And we've left a whole smorgasbord of things that we could consider. We probably won't be able to go very deep on any of these items, but we left them all in there just so we gave ourselves full flexibility. I do want to make the point that BEAD dollars are not allowed to be used at all for building bricks and mortar facilities. BEAD is not intended to build buildings. It is intended to bring the plumbing into those buildings. I'll call it that. High-speed fiber infrastructure into the buildings. There's a lot of confusion out there. People asking us, hey, can you help support building a new wing on our building? We can't do any of that kind of stuff. But there's a list of things, and I'm going to leave it at that. And we're going to invite you to dive in deep with volume 2 and read carefully how we've articulated some sections. Waivers. Again, we'll let you read. The waivers speak for themselves. They're written up. We've requested that NTIA give us some latitude. These are limited waivers. We think they're reasonable, but again, we have no idea. We've asked in our negotiation with extremely high cost locations to have the ability as a state to walk away from the match requirements after we've done a protocol. We think that's our best way to maybe reach with fiber some of the high cost locations. Lastly, I think everybody's well aware that our typical protocol with funding a project is waiting till the end to get paid. We think, hey, if you're going to wait till the end to get paid, why do you need a letter of credit? So we've asked for that waiver as well. But again, please read those. The full attachment of our waiver request is out there, and give us your feedback. Key milestones. Mike, you want to touch on these?
Yeah, so James and I sat down, we tried to outlay what we thought were going to be the steps necessary to get to the point where we're initiating, NTP to ISPs, right? And this essentially represents the steps, the interim and the milestone steps that are going to get us to the finish line and get our ISPs doing their thing, right? Getting broadband off here in the state. I'm not going to go verbatim here, but this really is kind of a, if you will, a detailed outlay of what Jim proposed in that initial graph that you saw in terms of timeline. So you saw that linear process, that linear timeline, what's supposed to happen over like the next year and a half. Bake this into that, and this is what we're up against, right? And this is in addition to, right, all of the work ISPs are already doing under ARPA, SLFRF, and of course soon to be ARPA CPM. So we feel you. We know this is a lot, and we're in the foxhole right next to you, trying to work through this. So again, just wanted to give that transparency. These are the steps we see coming. And again, if you have any questions, you can email broadband@ors.sc.gov. But really what we want are comments specifically about the initial proposals, volumes 1 and 2. We realize that it is not the easiest thing to read. We did try to do what made the most sense for the state, but again, it's not going to be complete until we hear back from the industry, until we hear back from you. So these are the links here. Again, everything that we're going to do specific to BEAD will be on the BEAD webpage on ORS's website. We are in the middle of the comment period. It's going to go on till November 30th. So please don't wait, right? Don't delay. Get out there, pull these suckers down, take a look at it, and give us some truth, right? No Monday morning quarterbacks here. If you have something that you're not comfortable with, please speak up. That's the entire reason NTIA is forcing all states and U.S. territories to do it. We're going to have to figure this out together no matter what. Last thing I wanted to share was, again, the disclaimer. This is all preliminary, right? Entirely possible. We're going to get additional direction from NTIA. We'll talk to some of our partnering states that we've interacted with, share ideas. We're going to obviously take all the feedback that we get from our citizens here that download, review, and comment on the initial proposals, and we're going to try to make this the best product we possibly can with a very tight timeline that we're all imposed to have to endure. So that is it. That's what we have today.
And yeah, just wrapping it up, I want to thank everybody in this room for putting, incredible amount of time and energy into this. Hopefully you got a lot out of this. And I want to say, we always try to thank our ISPs. Our role in the world as the broadband office, we don't connect a single home. We don't install a single mile of fiber. We know that that's what you guys do. We love you. We support you. We're counting on you guys to help bring internet for all to the state of South Carolina. And our phones are always open. If you need to pick up the phone, call us, give us, not comments, right? We want the comments in writing. But, we're happy to take feedback, and we look forward to seeing many of you over the next weeks at a variety of events around the state. So thanks, everybody. Grateful for your time.